Let 'em Go Barefoot is a podcast that dives into all things parenting and education through the lens of mindful awareness. Conversations aim to bring forward patterns, beliefs, and attitudes that shape our expectations and ideas about what it means to raise healthy children. With a blend of science, ancient wisdom, and intuition, we will explore ways to support, nurture, and connect with our growing children while also nurturing and expanding ourselves. I am grateful you are here. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 18 of the Let 'em Go Barefoot podcast. This episode is moving, it's deep, and it's an open conversation with the lovely Emma Hosfeld. I met Emma on Instagram, where she writes moving and beautiful pieces on parenting, education, and healing. I was immediately drawn to the way that she can get to the heart of things. Her pictures and her captions invite us in. She shares about the simple moments in life that really aren't so simple, and she discusses her personal struggles and triumphs. She digs into various ideas, challenging us to think deeper. But most importantly, her writing calls us to show up to life with radical responsibility and radical joy. In our conversation, Emma shares with us about her struggle with drugs and alcohol. She talks about her sobriety journey, what it has been like to become a mother, and making the choice to be a healthy role model for her 3 kids. We talk about the importance of building an intentional community for ourselves and our children, which is a nice extension of my previous episode and conversation with Julie Walter, where we discussed the power of community. If you haven't had a chance to listen to episode 17, it's a great one. Emma and I also talk about the fear and worry that we carry around as humans, but how vital it is to accept it as it is and move forward anyway. I think you will love this conversation just like I did, but fair warning, get your tissues ready. Emma reads a few of her pieces and they hit deeply. Maybe I was feeling extra sensitive during our conversation, but probably not. It just shows the power of how she strings words, experiences, and emotions together. Here is my conversation with Emma Hosfeld.
Hello, my name is Emma Hosfeld. I'm a wife. I've been married for 12 years, and we're a military family in the Marine Corps. I'm a mother of 3 never schooled kids. We have 3 kids. We have Quinn, who's about to turn 7. We have Jade, who's 5.5, and we have Lily, who is 4. So we did the 3 under 3 thing, which is you could have a whole podcast just on that. I'm a writer. I share most of my writing on Instagram at the handle emma.hosfeld. And by trade, I'm actually a dog groomer. So I work professionally. I've been doing that for about 10 years, but now I work with high needs dogs. So dogs that are, for whatever reason, they can't go to a regular groomer. They come to me, I give them one-on-one care, and that's what I do for basically for money, right? So that has meant a lot to our family. We're also a rescue family, so we have lots of animals. We have a dog, 2 cats, some frogs, and more have kind of passed through over the years. But so we're very heavy on the animal stuff here.
We can relate to that, yes, for sure. And especially having young kids, it makes it so much more lively and entertaining, and they
It
love it.
does. It's awesome for so many reasons.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can also relate to the dog grooming thing, not that specifically, but I do pet sitting and dog walking, and I love it.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's just, it's something to do. We have boarded dogs here. We used to then worked with a small breeder, not a small breeder,
Mm,
but a small rescue. So she
yeah.
would get tons of dogs, sometimes like 20 and 30 at a time. From like those failed sort of breeder situations, and
Sure.
actually our dog is from one of those, and
Oh,
uh,
cool.
and so we used to have pets, puppies here constantly. And then we took a big break, mainly because the kids were busier. But I'm just
Mhm.
personally like, we're going to start doing that again.
Yeah, and the thing I love about dogs too is it brings community together in a weird
Hmm.
way you wouldn't expect. Like I groom out of my home, and so I have about 200 clients, and they come to my home. They know my family. It's like it's just it ties the whole community together in such a unique way.
That is really neat. Yes.
Yeah, so I love that. I love that work.
And we were talking before we started recording about the community and importance of that for our kids and
Yeah.
having those kind of consistent people that they can
Mhm.
learn from and grow from and who kind of look out for them.
Yeah, one of the most important things to me has been my clients are also my friends. Some of them are in our homeschooling community,
Okay.
or they're friends with my parents, or I guess as an offshoot here, we live in kind of an idyllic, beautiful, people call it like a Hallmark town, right?
Uh-huh.
It's a small little Midwest town, right on the Mississippi River, and it's everyone kind of knows each other. It's like it's that really beautiful kind of old timey community, and I feel like that's so important for kids when they go to the grocery store. They know the checker by name. They know our mail woman. She brings them suckers. Like they know the mayor. They've met the mayor. Like that whole feeling of community is I feel like it's so powerful in our lives.
It
And
really is. Yeah.
yeah, I don't feel like I grew up with that same sense of community. I went to school about 45 minutes away from where I lived,
Mm.
right? So I felt like there was a divide there. Um, and being able to raise my kids in a small town setting where their family is here, and they see their friends. If they go to the park, they might run into someone they know. That's really meaningful to me,
Mhm.
building community. So
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
and speaking of the school part, you know, so much of what I ran into when I was in the schools were people who didn't live necessarily in the community where the schools were. So they
yeah,
couldn't participate in a lot of the extracurricular or after school activities because it was just too difficult to get back. And,
yeah.
I like how there are a lot of different, well, places throughout the country that do tend to have schools kind of closer to where people are kind of filtering in. But
Mhm.
I do think as unschoolers or homeschoolers, we do have to kind of build that community and be much more intentional. So it's nice that you have a space that's already established that can kind of expand out for your
Right.
kids.
Definitely a beautiful location for that. And you're right, it is our responsibility because when we choose not to send our kids to school, we don't have that built-in structure of here's 30 other kids your age, um, and the parents seeing them in the school pickup line. And it's very structured, very institutionalized, but it's a net of community
Mhm.
when you
It's
step outside
something. Yeah.
that, it's something. And there's value in that. And when we step outside of that, it's our responsibility to say, hey, we are going to build this for our family. This is important to us. And um, I've 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 witnessed that firsthand. We built a homeschooling community from the ground up here in 2020.
Oh, nice.
And
Okay. So how did that come about?
so a friend of mine and I were meeting at the park. This was when most of the parks here were shut down. And we said, well, our kids are going to play on the playground, okay? And,
Yeah.
and so we were talking, and she was saying all of these other, some of the wild and free groups. We live outside of the city of St. Louis, so a lot of these groups were coming from the city where things were a lot more tightly closed down. And we said we can't keep our kids in our houses away from each other. This isn't, that's not working
Mhm.
for us. And so she came to me with the idea of starting a homeschool community group that met once a week. And I said, yes, let's do it. And so we've used Facebook primarily uh, to to admin that, and it has grown to over 50 families.
Wow.
And we meet about twice a week now, and it's incredible. It's
Mhm.
truly it's life changing. It
Yeah.
is.
So how does it work then? How is it like do you call it a co-op? Do you call it like a wild and free group? Is it more just kind of free flowy or
So it's interesting. We already have in our small town a Christian co-op, okay, that requires a statement of faith to join.
Mm-hmm.
And there's families in the community that don't feel comfortable, myself included, signing a statement of faith that perhaps doesn't align with our values,
Right.
just to gain access to the homeschooling world, right? To have our kids play with the other homeschooling families, that doesn't sit right with me. And so we have actually two things. We have our Wild Roots community, which is families that meet. We meet every Monday, and you just have to show up about once a month to stay part of the group, right? So it's a lot more free flowing. We meet in parks, and we do anything from like a play date to a more structured museum tour, or we've done like vision board projects for our homeschooling year, um, like nature scavenger hunts. We do a lot of hiking, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've also created a co-op of our own. So this is an all-inclusive co-op that sits alongside the Christian co-op in our town, so that families have a choice to either do both. We do them on different days, so you could do both if you wanted to. Um, but this is an all-inclusive co-op, so we don't require a statement of faith, but we do. This is more structured than the community. We meet every Tuesday, and we meet, and it's actually a church basement, um, and there's actual classes, so kids can choose what classes to sign up for, go to their 8 a.m. class, their 8:30 class. We parents lead the classes. So we offer everything from like math classes to yoga and gymnastics, pretty much the full scope.
Right. Sounds so familiar to our experience when my kids were younger. We had the same idea, like groups that would just meet to kind of hike and be very free flowy.
Mhm.
And then we had the more structured one. And I ran up against my own beliefs, I guess, if you will, like
Mhm.
thinking that unschooling meant da 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 da. And then if we're doing classes, are we
Right.
really unschooling and
Right.
all the stuff that comes up with, trying to be rigid and sticking into these
Yes, yes.
boxes. And I was like, what am I doing? The whole reason we're homeschooling is so that we don't have to put ourselves in these boxes and have activities and interact with kids and families and do things that match what we want and need.
Hmm.
And I found over time, and especially looking back, depending on the kids, some kids want that structure. They want that
They
weekly
do.
thing,
Sure.
and so I think it just continues to go back to pay attention to the kid in front of you, ask questions, get feedback from them, see what they want, and then go from there. And I found with our co-op that we did for quite a few years, it was a wonderful experience, and it also connected my kids to so many different people, and so it was kind of like it just sort of webbed out from there.
Hmm.
And
Absolutely.
well, so we met through Instagram, and I started following you. I'm not really even sure how, just like most Instagram pages. I don't know how, where, when, it just happens.
Right.
And I have loved your writing, Emma. I think you
Thank
are really gifted, and you share things that just get to the heart of the matter. And I love what I think you've recently kind of updated your Instagram. Um, what is that? What do you even call that? A byline? Your description of your
you.
page?
Yeah, I guess like in your bio or
Bio.
whatever.
Yes, there we go. So
Sure.
it says radical responsibility and radical joy. And I really like that. And I'm just wondering, how did you get there? Where did this idea come from? And, how do you live that
Mhm.
out in your life right now?
Sure. I guess so. Something else to mention about me is I am 7 years sober.
Right.
So in my past, um, I was kind of a low life, for lack
Mm,
of a better term. Um, I used basically any illicit drug that I could mention, and I what I know about myself during that time is that I was basically running away. I was escaping anything that's uncomfortable, right?
mm-hmm.
The uncomfortable feeling, um, especially any feeling of vulnerability. And and so for me, radical responsibility, radical joy is kind of like a formula for living fully in and recognizing the the full scope of our humanity, right? With
Yeah.
its limitations, its ugly side, its positive side. And um, I think without the ugly side, you don't get the positive side.
Right.
So without sitting in the depth of my vulnerability that comes with all the shame and anger and sadness. Without that, I can't access the joy,
Mm,
right? You can't get there. Um, and so I think it means taking responsibility for the fullness of your humanity, including all those ugly parts.
yeah.
At its core, I think that's what it means to me.
Okay.
And it's a message of self-respect. Like, um, to me, self-respect means doing what you say you're going to do in alignment with your values. And I guess part of that means you have to know what your values are,
Yeah.
right? And but after you know what your values are, you have to do what you say you're going to do. And that includes doing what you tell yourself you're going to do and
Mm-hmm.
doing what you know to be the right thing. Because I think a lot of the time, if we get really still, I think it's Jordan Peterson who said, if you don't know the next right thing, sit on your bed, get really quiet, and you'll know the next right thing. It will come to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it won't be an answer you want, right?
Yeah.
Um, but it'll come to you. So I think it's knowing what the next right thing to do is, and then doing it. And that's how you gain self-respect. And that's what an addict doesn't have, is self-respect.
Sure. Well, and
My
it's like it's not why the addiction, but why the pain,
right.
and so people start, if you can stop for a second and think about it and not call yourself a name as an quote unquote addict, but why did I get here? Where
Sure.
did this all come from? And then, bring it takes a lot of bravery and strength and even awareness to be able to even start going down that road of peeling back those layers and looking at the road that was paved to get you where you are. And
Yeah.
so what was your turning point? Did you have like a couple of things or a specific thing that just kind of got you to where you were like, okay, this is enough?
Yeah. So I think two things. Something I would mention is, have you ever heard of the Nagoski sisters?
I haven't.
Emily. Okay. They do work on emotions, and it's really interesting. But they talk about emotions as being tunnels, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you have to go all the way through,
Yeah.
get out, otherwise you get stuck in it. And I think sometimes as an addict, it is why the pain, because there is pain there, right? But once you know, once you recognize that pain and where it's coming from, you still have to go all the way through it to the other side,
You're right.
right? There's no way out of that.
And
Um,
there's no shortcuts.
there's not. And that's it. That's why it's hard, but it's also so empowering because there is another side there to those feelings, those really dark, ugly feelings that we all experience. We don't have to try to shortcut them. We can go all the way through, and you can survive the feeling and get all the way to the other side of the tunnel where your nervous system can calm down a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so the turning point for me was actually giving birth to my first son.
Oh,
Um, and I know,
I know. Oh.
I know. And at the time, let's see, when I first got pregnant with him, I went to like a traditional OB, and they were doing like cervical checks at 12 weeks and just stuff that, looking back, I'm like, why were we
Yeah, so
doing
invasive, right?
right? And I didn't feel like I had a voice in the pregnancy or my medical care. And at the time, I was following some people. This is really fun for me because I get to mention someone I really love. January Harshi
Mm.
of Birth Without Fear. She's no longer on Instagram, but you can go back and look at her full archive.
How do you spell her last name?
It's Harshe, Harshe.
S-H-E. Okay.
Yeah, and I think you can find her at the handle just Birth Without Fear.
Birth.
She
Okay.
might have one under her name and at Birth Without Fear, if I'm not mistaken. But she's also written a book under the same title, Birth Without Fear.
Got it.
And so anyway, I was following people like her and like the Empowered Birth Project. And this is where Instagram and stuff is like such a powerful tool, right? Because I was just flipping through on my phone, and I can say with complete certainty that changed the trajectory of my entire life.
Wow.
And some of these women that were sharing their experiences on Instagram or whatever, and it can be so powerful. So anyway, so that birth was very challenging. He was premature. He was a month premature. And although I had transferred to a birth center, I did not get to give birth in the birth center because he was a month premature. So I ended up in a hospital with an OB I didn't know, and I labored for 18 hours,
Oh
and
God.
I pushed for 6.5,
Wow.
which is kind of insane looking back. Like most OBs wouldn't let you do that, but that's what we did.
Mm.
And throughout that entire labor, I was also sick with a terrible cold, right? So I'm coughing the whole time, can barely breathe. Um, and uh, and myself and my husband through the whole time had to advocate for ourselves because we didn't want any unnecessary interventions. So the nurses are coming in offering and pushing for some of these interventions, and we went through this experience of having to really advocate for ourselves. Like, no, we don't want that. We don't need the pitocin. We don't need any pain medication. Like, this is how we're doing this. And obviously the birth itself was very challenging physically, and yet I got to the other side of that, and my month premature son was born perfectly healthy.
Mm.
And I just remember this feeling of like, I can go all the way through that and I'm okay.
Yeah.
Like I'm really okay. Like I'm more than okay. And being like, wow, like I have really been playing small, you
Hmm.
know? And so
Interesting. Yeah.
I think I got sober when I became pregnant with him.
Okay.
But in my head,
Mm.
I think I was still like, what's going to happen after this pregnancy? Like, what? I didn't trust myself. I didn't have that self respect of knowing that I could trust myself to do what I said I needed to do.
Mm. Almost like
Right.
your brain put things on pause. You didn't make any commitments.
Right.
You were like,
Right.
we're not gonna talk about it. We're just gonna go through
Sure.
this part, and then that life might come back. But yeah, it wasn't quite there
Yeah.
yet.
And even then, I breastfed him, and through the breastfeeding, I guess I thought, well, I'm not going to drink or do anything that would hurt my baby. So I still mentally was kind of like, I had that peace in my head knowing I could do hard things. I made it through that. It was the foundation of what came next. But I got pregnant immediately, then about 9 months later with my second son. So pregnant breastfeeding. I feel like I had this barrier in my mind that's like, well, I'm not doing anything now, but there was this kind of unspoken question in the back of my head, like, what's going to happen once these kids grow up? Like, am I going to fall back? I didn't trust myself fully.
Mm.
And then when I was first pregnant with my second son, my brother-in-law died. He died. He overdosed on fentanyl.
Oh gosh.
And yeah. And when I was 16 years old, I overdosed on fentanyl.
Emma.
And I woke up in an ambulance and they said 5 more minutes and you wouldn't be here. And so I had a moment where we were standing in the morgue looking at his body with this baby in my belly, right?
Oh yeah.
And I remember thinking like, wow, that really could have been me.
Yeah.
Like really could have been me. It should have been me. And because I made the same choice he made. I just got luckier, right?
Yeah.
Um and And when I walked out of the morgue, I felt more alive than I've ever felt in my life.
How about that?
Isn't that wild? And
Yeah.
I remember I was just walking through the grocery store before I went home thinking, I feel so like this is a gift,
Yeah.
you know, like the choice. I was being so disrespectful just to life itself or to whatever higher power we want to talk about. Like the choices I was making to try to hide, I was hiding from life, right? Like I was hiding from being fully alive. And I think after that I was like, it's so selfish. It's incredibly I was making very selfish choices trying to stay small. And so that's what radical responsibility is to me. It's like taking responsibility for this life and gift it's not guaranteed,
Mm-mm.
and we choose what we do with it, right?
Yeah.
So, like, I can wax poetic about things that happened in my childhood. My brother-in-law had things happen in his childhood. I'm sure, we can connect all the dots and list all the things that it's like, well, this is why I make the poor decisions I make. I have this pain. But at the end of the day, we have to make choices. And I think
Absolutely. Yeah.
taking responsibility for our lives is so important. And then that's how you get to these moments of bliss and joy and feeling alive and feeling connected to each other, and it all balances out, you know.
Yeah. Gosh, there's so much to unpack in what you just said. I know. Um, my mind is really racing, so I'm gonna try to put it in some sense of order. Okay. So walking out of the morgue and feeling more alive than you've ever felt. You know, the juxtaposition of those feelings, I've I know people know exactly what you're talking about. When
Mhm.
something's supposed to be so terrible and sad and hard, and then simultaneously there's joy and happiness and life.
Yeah.
And, you know, for me and my personal experiences on this road of life and ups and downs and difficulties and triumphs, I know I've felt that exact same thing. You know, my mom died very suddenly, and I felt like the my I felt like the ground just fell out from underneath me, and I just got
Yeah.
sucked in. And then within, you know, a couple of days, I had the most peace in my body that I've ever felt in my entire life. And I was like,
Mhm.
how can I have peace right now with this
Yeah.
big hole in my life? So it sent me on quite a journey of discovery and acceptance that in order to be here, you have to show up for it all. You
You
can't
do.
pick and choose. And even if you want to play small, you're going to be constantly challenged to not.
Mhm.
And so instead of running away, being curious, being
Yes.
open, not making a decision necessarily right when something happens, but just sitting with it.
Right.
Um, Also circling, putting people around you that can help you, because I do believe that that's one of the missing pieces for a lot of people's recovery and healing is
Yes.
there's so much you can do on your own, and I absolutely encourage people to think about what they can do on their own, but we can't discount the fact that having a network and a safety net and like
Yes.
an environment that encourages your healing is really powerful too.
Absolutely. And I think some of that is being vulnerable with people, because they can't help you if you're not being your authentic self.
Mhm.
And that was something I struggled with a lot. Was I didn't feel like in high school, in my young adult life, I didn't feel like there was somewhere where I could be 100% authentically myself. um and I felt like I was almost splitting my personality. Like, I have my work self, and I have my self when I go visit my family, and I have like my friend self when we go out to the bars or whatever. Like, I have my wife self for my husband, and it's just like this fracturing.
Mm.
And I think a strong community, what is the gift of a strong community is like we we can be our authentic self. That's the measure of the health of a community, almost, is um how much we feel we can really show up.
The
And
Yeah, that belonging no matter what.
yes, yes. And sometimes we have to create that for ourselves, I think. Like, I had that experience when, let's see, I guess I would have been pregnant with my third. And I looked around, I realized you know, I'm kind of, it was like, I guess after that experience with the death of my brother-in-law, and after the experience of giving birth twice, and I kind of knew I was on this like sobriety journey, but I looked around and I did not have any friends. You
Mm.
know, my mom and dad have always been there. So, and I don't want to glaze over that fact that they are a support network for me that a lot of people don't have. So that I don't want to downplay that. They have been the whole time, but I did not have any friends
Mhm.
that I could look to, right? And that was just so vitally missing in my life. Um, and I think I spent a couple months at least knowing that, and just kind of feeling sorry for myself. Like, well, I can't, what can I do? I have two babies and I'm pregnant again. And like, I go to work every day, and I can't like go out and make friends, you know?
Mhm.
And then one day I said, this is enough. Like, I have to take a step. and I reached out on my birth center had a Facebook page, and that was like one of the only places where I knew like a bunch of women my age were, right? I didn't have
Mm-hmm.
that many friends on Facebook, nothing. So I went on there and I literally almost begged for friends.
Yeah.
I said, I don't have any, I want someone to come and, get together with. And the crazy thing is, a girl from my hometown who also went to that birth center commented and said, "Me too.
Yeah.
That's also me. That's the situation I'm in."
Mm-hmm.
And she said, I want to start getting together too. I don't have any friends either. And she invited me over to her house. And we had kids kind of the same age. And from that point, from me and her having that really awkward, weird, vulnerable
Mm-hmm.
first play date where it's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to show up some stranger's house. Um, and like, what if she doesn't like me,
Right.
and what if my kids act crazy? And like it from that place has grown the homeschool community we have now, the co-op we have now, um, and a whole network, like just a big spider web of support in our community. Like, and it's on Facebook, which is, I know that social media can get a bad rap sometimes, but it's a tool and we can use it
Oh,
to
yeah.
take like that and create the community that we want.
Absolutely.
And,
Yeah. No, I
and
think it's a wonderful tool, and it with the way things are in life right now, it kind of is
yeah,
the most logical thing to use to connect to people.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so I guess on with the point of community as it relates to like sobriety and getting help, I think sometimes you still have to create that community for yourself. So it's
Mm-hmm.
still taking responsibility, and then you have those people through vulnerability. That's how you make those connections. That's how you maintain those connections, is through that vulnerability. And
Absolutely.
and so really getting vulnerable and feeling really, really uncomfortable is always the first step, no matter what you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and gosh, some really amazing stuff comes out of that.
It sure does. And I think so much it depends on the messages you heard growing up too. What
Mhm.
stories were you told about sharing your opinion and your feelings,
Yes.
and how does that the people that maybe said, well, we don't want to go down that road, or we don't want to talk about that thing, or we want to keep that
Yeah.
quiet. A lot of that can play into how people now as adults want to express themselves. um, which I think we all can agree that all of us can get a little too emotional and a little too into our feelings and not tapping into reality. But that's kind of where it starts. You got a feeling about something, and it's kind of like a little nudge, or
Hmm.
or it's a big waving red flag. So
Yeah.
it runs the gamut of like and then sometimes it's that little voice, like, or that little inner knowing, something needs a change, something needs a shift. And I think you hit on something super important, which is that if you need it, chances are somebody else does too. And
Right.
so why not just put it out there and just see what happens? And it might not be immediate. You might have to be patient, and it might be small at
Mhm.
first, and it might
It is.
stay small. It might not turn into anything big, and that's okay too. But you got to start somewhere.
Right. Like with our homeschool community that we have grown, I have hosted events where no one showed up. Nobody.
Mm-hmm.
And I've also hosted events where 20 families came and everything in between. And so when you're getting vulnerable and trying to build something new or make connections with new friends, like sometimes it's going to be like that. I've invited people over to my house and had like one person show up.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be like, oh, this is awkward, but that's the journey, like it all of those like kind of awkward moments have led us to have this like beautiful thriving community.
Yeah. Well, and a lot
um
of times it's not about you either, right? It's especially when you're trying to
yeah.
organize for a bunch of people or in a community of some sort. It just might be all about the timing. It just didn't work
Right.
out for so many people for whatever reason, but it doesn't mean it's anything about you. It's just about the situation that everybody else is in.
Right.
Well, talking about your writing, there's a post you made in relation to your sobriety, and how would you feel about reading it to us?
Okay, I can do that.
Okay.
I think I can do that.
No, we can try. We can try.
Okay. So this is a post about um it's 14 years ago. So I've been sober for 7 years. But about 14 years ago was when this is a reflection on when I was downtown in my little city with my kids recently, and we were leaving the theater where my mom is the director for local community.
Oh.
It's just idyllic. Like we're down there, it's beautiful. You know, my family's there. At the theater, we met some of our homeschool friends. You know, at the restaurant across the street, I know the people that work there. Like it just feels so great down there. It's beautiful.
Mhm.
And yet, I remember 14 years ago when I was down there, I was like just doing drugs, like doing drug deals in people's houses, like just horrible stuff, right? Like, so I think it's this reflection on like really life can be what you make it. Like it's made out of these choices we make. And it felt so empowering to know like I've made it to this place where I can be in the same location with a lot of the like same people are around still in this town, and yet the choices that I've made and the community that we've built and has made all the difference, right? It's changed everything.
Right. And the
So
mistakes don't have to define you.
they don't. That's right. That's right. So anyway, I'll read it.
Okay.
14 years ago, on this very street, I was doing cocaine in the back of a dirty red Corvette. 14 years ago, on this very street, I was throwing up, naked and drunk in a strange man's bathroom. 14 years ago, on this very street, I bought a bottle of pills from a stranger. 14 years ago, on this very street, in a house now demolished, unspeakable things happened. And today, today I stand rocking my sweet sleeping child on this very street. 2 more children looking at me from my minivan. Today, my sweet husband's taking my photo. Today, I'm on my way home to my cozy little cottage house to eat snacks and go to sleep. Today, I can hear house parties in the distance. I can hear women at the bar screaming. I see them stumbling. I could tell you I'm a different person now, but I'm not. I'm the same person, with one exception. 14 years ago, I was a coward. I was running away. But today, on this very street, today I take responsibility for my life. No matter where you are, your life is in your hands. Step up.
Whew. That's so good. That's so good. You made it through, but I'm not sure I did. Oh gosh. Wow, Emma, that's good. It's good
Thank
stuff.
you.
Yeah. And it's important, I think I told you right at the beginning, the whole reason that I think these conversations matter is because people get strength from others' stories. They
Yes.
can see what's possible. They can get ideas. They can be challenged. Um, they can be inspired. And
Hmm.
I think what you've written is powerful for all those reasons. And it also teaches us that we're not alone. And,
Yeah.
if anything, I think social media has certainly helped people realize that they're not alone in their fear or their worry or their concern or their, um, you know, eh, even their joy. That's the other part of it too, is that sometimes we think we need to have somebody always for the negative side, but we also need somebody for the positive side. We need people who celebrate
Absolutely.
when we win and
Yes.
celebrate when we're excited and happy and meet us with that equal excitement, not just when we're sad. They only show up for the sort of downtime.
Yes.
And I think I'm curious about the fact that you're back in the same place where all those things happened. And I imagine you're seeing some of the same people, like maybe within
Hmm.
your families, your
Sure.
parents' age brackets or age groups. Do you feel like there's been a full circle moment for you?
Yeah. Yeah. I think there has been. I don't know if it's a moment
Yeah, sure.
that I can narrow it down to, but I do feel that.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that now we own this like adorable little house in the same town, and across the street from my house, I can see the building where I went to high school. It's now their junior high building, but it was our high school. My husband and I both went there. I can see it right now from where I'm sitting
Mm-hmm.
out my window. And there's, there's something about that. Like I had some really terrible experiences in that building and around there. And I can remember like down the street from here, like smoking cigarettes and and I can like look out my adorable little cottage house with like my cat on my lap and
Mm-hmm.
my kids and like I just gosh, it does feel full circle, you know? Like
Mm-hmm.
it feels like I've made it. But it's still a choice that I make every day,
Yeah.
right? So it's not like the journey is over. But even where it doesn't relate to like drug use and alcohol, like it's still a journey of like making the right little micro choices, right? Um, and yeah, it does feel full circle.
Yeah. Well, and also the mindset and making a decision. You mentioned earlier about having values and what your values are. And I think it's important to call out the fact that a lot of people don't really even know what their values are. And I don't say that and to be like a negative thing. It's more like just a recognition, and not because they don't want to, but maybe they weren't taught to, or maybe
Sure,
they weren't in a situation or a family that really discussed values or discussed things like that openly. And children were sort of left to their own devices to create a value system for themselves. And
sure.
so I encourage people whenever I talk to anybody about homeschooling or unschooling is to kind of get clear with their why on why they're homeschooling. Why do they want to unschool? And I think
Yes.
that's the same for life in general. What's your
Yeah.
why? What makes you want to
Mhm.
show up every day? What makes you excited? What makes you want to tip the scales of the world towards goodness? And let those things be the wind in your sails, if you will.
Absolutely. That's definitely a huge piece of the deschooling journey.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Yeah.
speaking of that, you homeschool and unschool, and you
Yes.
also write a lot about that, your mothering experience, being the role model that you want to be for your kids, and what unschooling looks like. And you wrote a post, I think it was like August 9th, maybe, and um, it was about unschooling and what it is, and then
Hmm.
also um, I'm going to read the line from it. It says, um, it's what do unschooling parents do? And you kind of explained it. And I think we should read that one too, if it's okay with you, because I think it was beautifully done. But
Sure.
you have the line at the end, it's nothing revolutionary. It's often simple, but it is work. And
I found it. Let's see.
okay, good.
Um, should I read the whole thing for you?
Yeah, let's
I,
do it.
okay. Okay. What do unschooling parents do? Here's just one example from our home with young children. Okay. On the 4th of July, we took the kids out to the country to light our small fireworks. Our oldest found a hot bucket full of tadpoles, thousands of tadpoles. He was mesmerized. And we could have left it at that. But I'm their guide, I'm their facilitator, and above all, I'm their role model. Modeling curiosity and investigation is the name of the game. So I suggested we scoop out some with the water bottle. We slurped them up, okay? With the water bottle. I don't know how else to get them out. uh, I stuck my hand in the slime and I siphoned out 15 perfect little tadpoles. I cared for them all night, making sure they didn't overheat while we watched fireworks. I explained what to expect when raising tadpoles and what conditions they might need to thrive. I made dechlorinated, treated water for them when we got home late at night. I was tired. I drove the kids to the thrift store the next day and we found a $5 reptile tank. I placed the tank at eye level for the littlest children so they could observe our tiny visitors over the next 10 weeks. I changed the water twice a day. The children helped. I made sure that they were fed quality frog food. I explained why overfeeding hurts the frogs. I helped them find books at the library about amphibians. I read them aloud at bedtime. I noticed and made sure to tell the kids when the first legs appeared. I invited their friends over to see. I helped them scoop the first 2 frogs out of the tank safely. I drove them to the lake inlet and I showed them how to hold out their hands so the first 2 frogs could hop on and say goodbye. It's nothing revolutionary. It's often simple, but it is work. You don't have to buy a curriculum and sit down at the kitchen table and talk about bodies of water and amphibians and draw beautiful pictures on a chalkboard. I mean, you can if you want to. But if you require them to pay attention to you talk about frogs from 8 to 8:15 and then you do a worksheet about what you taught them before they're allowed to go outside and play in the backyard, kind of loses its magic, doesn't it? This is education without schooling. Unschooling requires the parents to be interested and willing to engage in the world around them. Our whole life is learning for us and for them.
Yeah. Gosh, so good. And, that's such a great example of how you can replicate that sort of idea over and over again with your
Right,
kids. And it doesn't have to be just the moment itself, it can be the moment, and you can expand on the moment, and you can stretch it out, and
right,
it it's very powerful. And
right.
again, it's the living part
Right.
that the kids want.
Right. And so I didn't have like it is it is a lot of work. Part of it's just noticing like their eyes light up, right? Like we were out there and I noticed the tadpoles and I said like, "Hey buddy, look, tadpoles." And like that look in his eye like,
Mm-hmm.
"What? Wow." It's curiosity um right there. Like you can see it in their face.
Yeah.
And whenever I see that, it's like, okay, well there's something here. Like that's the curiosity is the jumping off point to all the learning
Mm-hmm.
in my mind. And in unschooling it's like our gateway to everything else, because I don't have a curriculum where I top down teach, and so there still has to be like a starting point, and the starting point is their curiosity.
Right.
Then I facilitate the rest. Like that's my role, because I as an unschooling parent, like you can't just sit down and do nothing. That's
Mm-mm.
not it either, right? I know that's like a big misconception. And when people hear unschooling, it's like unparenting, like
Mm-hmm.
you're not doing anything with your kids, but that's not it. Like it is work.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a different kind of work that doesn't always look the same from the outside. Like you can't see me sitting down and teaching them what is an amphibian, right? Or this is the life cycle of a frog. Like we've literally never had a worksheet that showed the life cycle of a frog, but we've talked about it. And when he said, "Mommy, can I look at pictures of frogs on the internet?"
Yeah.
I'll put it up for him, and we look together. And yeah, it's simple, but I just think it's so cool, like how we can do that with anything. Like he gets interested in, oh my gosh, like my first child, he's just about to turn 7, and he can be interested in anything. He is just like he can dive so deep into his interest. And I love watching that. It's like it's really magical.
Mm-hmm. It's inspiring too. You forget
Yeah.
kind of like what that looks like. I think as adults, sometimes, especially when we went through the system where it was like everything had a timeline on it or a timer,
Mhm.
and to really see our kids dive deeply into a topic is it's quite fascinating. And I know throughout the whole years of us unschooling, and there were times where I'm like, I'm learning so much.
Yeah,
I remember
absolutely.
feeling cheated as a kid now because I'm like,
Mhm.
I didn't know this stuff, or why didn't I get a chance to, there was a lot of that went on for me at the beginning. And then finally was like, okay, just let that go. You're here now. Let's do this. And yeah, you're right. It's so fascinating to watch how
Yeah,
deeply they can go with things.
it's so cool. There's so many moments where they'll say something or they'll do something just on their own, and like my husband and I, we look at each other like, man, this is how it can be,
Yeah.
And my mother is a retired school teacher,
Okay.
uh, she worked mostly in early childhood, um, and she's told me multiple times that she said, I did not know it could be like this,
Hmm.
which I just think is like it's heartbreaking and inspiring and beautiful at the same time,
Hmm.
uh, because she's a brilliant teacher. right? Um, in and being a teacher has its own skill set. Like you have 30 kids in a classroom, that's something different
Yes, it
than
is.
having your child in your home. It's a whole different ball game. Like that requires a different skill set. It does.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that's what broke me because it was just like impossible impossible. I couldn't wrap my mind around that at all.
it's yeah, it's something. And like I teach art at our co-op to a classroom full of kids. And so it takes like, group, you have to manage a group of kids.
Mhm.
It's classroom management skills. It's a whole thing. And so I get like a little peek into that. And I've seen my mother do it and and she's just brilliant at it. But it's what's different about doing it at something like the co-op is all the kids want to be there.
Right.
For
That buy-in is so important. Yeah.
it is. It's like consent based education in a weird
Mhm.
way for most of these families. And like for mine, we had our 5-year-old recently said, I don't want to go to co-op. I don't like it. I don't want to go back. Um,
Yeah.
and it was like, oh, okay. And this is where I have to like walk the walk of unschooling, where it's like we can figure out a way for you to not go, but his brother and sister still want to go,
Mhm.
right? So it I think unschooling is this weird like it's consent based, but you can't just say, well, you don't want to go, well none of us will go,
Mhm.
it's a family thing. It involves the whole family, and you have to take every individual into consideration. I think that's like it's so healthy because you're practicing consent, but consent doesn't just relate to one person in the family, it's all of us. So we
Mhm.
we work together to make sure all of our needs are met. And that's where the good stuff is, I think, for unschooling. Like we can learn how to. People say like how will they ever learn how to do things they don't want to do? Um, if you just let them, oh, he doesn't want to go, you just let him stay home. Like, how is he ever gonna get grit and learn how to do what he doesn't want to do? He does what he doesn't want to do all the time. First of all,
Yeah.
because he has a brother and a sister and a mother and a father, and everyone else's needs matter too. So that's how we live our lives. But I guess another piece of that is of learning how to do hard things is like I see my unschooled kids doing hard things. Oh man, things that
Mm.
matter to them. Learning how to do a very difficult task that in some way matters to you, like you see the value in it, even if you're like, I hate doing this, but I have to do it to get to the next thing, right? Um, that's that's more important. I don't want my kids to grow up and learn how to do what other people tell them to do.
Mhm.
Just because like I want them to have some buy-in in it too, even in a workplace. Like if that work environment and that job, the whole thing isn't serving you, then I want them to have enough self-respect to know like if self-respect is doing like it's trusting yourself, then I want them to trust themselves enough to say, I can leave this job and I can find a different opportunity and something that works for me. And kind of have some precedent for that. Like, oh, remember when I didn't like doing that one class? I quit. I quit and I went and did something else. And then I, or remember when that was really hard for me, but I really wanted to learn how to play the guitar. So I just like my son is very into instruments and learning the piano, and he'll get so frustrated not knowing how to do something,
Right.
and he still pushes through and does it, and then he'll come to me and he knows how to play Mary Had a Little Lamb or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, and he got so frustrated, I mean like he gets upset, you know
Mhm.
but then he still pushes through and does it. And some people say, well, how are they going to learn how to do things that are hard? I'm like, they're doing that every day,
Yeah.
you know
Well, and I think that speaks volumes about the messages that so many people get that you're not trusted to be able to do hard things and push through it and challenge yourself. So we have to do that to
exactly.
you.
Yes,
And then the difference, of course, between doing something because somebody told you is that all you're doing is trying to find shortcuts and finish, and
that's right. And
nothing
that's
sticks.
that's what a lot of times grading does, because I can remember times in school where it's like you you're getting a grade on it, right? So they give you a project, or you're not going to choose the most challenging project that's super interesting to you that you're like really curious about. Like
Mm-hmm.
you probably already lost that a couple years ago. You're like choosing something you know you can get a good grade on. You're going to write about an easier topic because you know it'll get you a better grade. So I think it creates this mindset when we grade kids and we're constantly evaluating them. It creates this like, well, let me choose the easiest path, like the path of least resistance, because what actually matters isn't this process or what I'm doing or what I'm interested in. What matters is like the how someone else is going to evaluate me. So let me just choose something easy. I could get a good grade, you know? Like
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
um I just don't think it accomplishes what we want it to accomplish. Like
Not at all. No, and it's not about it's not that deep education. It's more like you said earlier in your your post. It's schooling. It's a game,
it
and
is.
you have to play that game. I'm not saying learning doesn't happen, and you know that it does. I mean, we all learned something while we were there, and
Yeah.
plenty of connections were made. But
Yes.
couldn't it possibly be that we could do it a better way?
Yeah, and we could do it in a way that I worry about the side effects of schooling.
Yeah.
Like, when I read early in my process of kind of, we always knew we wanted to homeschool,
Okay.
but early in my process of like, I think the first book I read was Pam Lorickia's Free to Learn.
Mm,
And I thought to myself, this is nonsense, quite frankly. And I love Pam Lorickia now. Okay.
mhm.
Like, but when I first read it, I was like, this is too far out there for me.
Yeah.
I,
It seemed too
this is,
extreme.
it's too extreme. Letting kind of like, whoa, no bedtimes, like, whoa. um, and gosh, and then I had a friend at the park that I really respected, and she has these lovely teenagers, and I said, "What curriculum do you use?" I was in this like nervous place of like, oh my gosh, my kids are like my child's about to turn 4. Like, we got to get serious about this.
Yeah.
And I was like, what curriculum do you use? Very worried. And she said, "Oh, we unschool." And that was shortly after I'd read that Free to Learn.
Mm,
Thought, well, that's nonsense. And I saw her lovely children who are just, I mean, to this day, like so kind and considerate. And I just like, they're, intelligent. And I'm like, well, maybe there's something more to this.
yeah.
Okay. um, and as time has gone on, I've met more unschoolers with grown children. And I'm like, okay, there's something to this. So the, when I read the next things I was kind of reading were like Peter Gray's Free to Learn,
Mhm.
uh, which one of my friends says she says it gives you the receipts,
Yeah.
right? It's like, okay, this sounds good. Kind of sounds too good to be true, this unschooling thing a little bit.
Mhm.
I need the receipts. I need to see the studies that say that these kids aren't destitute on the side of the road as grown-ups. And I feel like Peter Gray kind of does that in his work. Free to Learn does a good job of that. Naomi Fisher's Changing Our Minds does a good job of that too.
Mm, okay.
Um, but but when I read John Taylor Gatto, I took the books to my husband. I said, "You have to read these books."
Yeah, he's one of the ones that really will push people over. Like just, it's
Uh
it's
huh.
almost like no going back once you start reading his stuff.
It is. It kind of not. Yeah, it knocks you back. You have to sit there and like take it in. Like, oh man, because you see so much, especially as somebody who has gone through the K to 12
Mhm.
system.
Mhm. And
Uh,
won many awards or a teacher of the year award on top of it.
right, right. He did, and then for us to have gone through it, right? Like as parents, you can see so much truth in what he's saying,
Mhm.
and it's almost hard to read.
Right, because it feels well, at least for me, I'll speak for myself. I felt hoodwinked, I felt
Mhm.
I felt manipulated, and there was a lot of anger, honestly, when
Yeah.
I started really kind of going, "Oh my gosh, what are we doing? What have we done? Why are we still accepting things the way
Hmm.
that we are accepting things?" And I mean, of course I can understand all the reasons why certain things happen the way they do, but it doesn't mean that we can't question it and also start small. And I think that's what I'm witnessing over the last, I mean, I've been doing this now since well, my son was born in 2001, but we didn't officially, start the whole process until he became close to school age. But I've seen such a growth in it, and so many families saying, I want to take my life back now. I want to take my family back now. It's
Yes.
time for us to pull back in. It's time for us to make our family bond stronger and,
Mhm.
stop centering school so much. And,
Yes.
I heard something the other day about how if you really think about how school has infiltrated our lives, it's we organize communities around it, our yearly schedule around it, our holidays around it, and yet it's not that we've necessarily made things better because of it. And so I think it's important for us to really examine what is its purpose, and if its
Yeah.
purpose is not being fulfilled, then
Like, yeah, we have to create new systems.
mhm,
If we see the problem with it, that's where like the bravery comes in, and we have to say, I trust myself enough that I'm going to step outside of this. Because oh man, sending your kids to school feels like such a guarantee, doesn't it? Like,
mhm,
it feels like, oh, I'm handing this over to somebody. Like, I can take this off my plate.
yeah,
Um, and it feels like a guarantee. Like, it's not a guarantee.
no,
And so, yeah, it's having that self trust and that responsibility piece to kind of step up and say, like, okay, I see this isn't working. I'm gonna create something better, and doing that in our communities, like all over the world, little by little, and it is growing.
mhm.
And that's so cool to watch, I think.
It really is. I don't remember the exact number, but I had written about the hashtag unschooling on Instagram when I first started
Mhm.
on Instagram, and it was like barely existent, and now it's like a million or something,
So cool.
or, and I'm like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh. So to see, I wish I would have written it down like and watched it get larger, but it's everywhere now. More
Yes.
and more people are gravitating towards it because I think we sit, like you said earlier, if you sit still long enough, you'll get a message, you'll hear,
Yeah.
that nudge is there, and it's just a matter of stepping up and answering
Yeah.
that call.
It can be so hard because you know the next right thing, but you have those voices of, well, my mother-in-law will judge me.
Mm,
What will the teacher think when I pull my kid out of her class? Am I going to be judged by my whatever, my church community or whoever, for this choice? Am I going to mess my kid up? Like, you have all these doubts and these fears, but you still, underneath all of that, know the next right thing to do.
hmm
Um, and so it's really about doing that
yeah.
despite all that noise and that fear. It doesn't go away, really. It does get quieter, I think, as you start to live out your values, but it's you'll never get to a place where you're living out your values and you have no fear. It's always there,
hmm
comes and goes. So
Yeah, it's like you said, you get those receipts eventually when you start seeing it all playing out in your own family. And I mean, I
you do.
experienced that for sure.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
especially coming from the background of education. It's like, who am
Hmm.
I to buck this system that's been in place for so long? Who do you think you
Sure.
are?
Sure. And you do get the receipts. Like, I'm watching I've watched my almost 7-year-old learn to read on his own.
Mm,
And I say on his own. I don't we live in a literate house. We have books on the shelf. We watch leapfrog videos from the library, like, just little, it's just life things like that. And he has taught himself to read, and I watch him do it, and I'm like, okay,
hmm
well, what would have happened if when he was 4 or 5, I sat and drilled him? Would he still be like loving to like sit under a blanket for it and read his little book and sound out his words and be like, oh, he still has this light in his eyes, like, mommy, look it, I can read this whole book. Like,
hmm
oh, it's so cool to watch, like, and be a part of and help facilitate. It's an honor.
It is. It's such an honor. And, it just ties in so beautifully to your own personal experience and your own journey of transformation, and how you have to just be brave enough to step out. And, when you want to
Yeah.
change yourself, if you want to switch up something that's happening, if you want to break patterns, it just takes that you have to take that step. Just one.
The little steps. It really is. It's cliche, but it really is one day at a time for all of
Mhm.
these things. Um, and it's doing difficult things. Like I talked about going through my birth experience, and when you do difficult things, you start to trust yourself. You gain more self-respect,
Yeah.
and and it all, yeah, it all comes together.
Confidence is action. I think that's
Yes.
where it comes from. You can't read yourself into confidence. you have to
Right.
you have to physically go out and do the things.
Yes, I had to sit for 2 years and watch my child not read. Right? Like thinking, oh my gosh, like I am talking about unschooling stuff. Like I do believe in this, but look at this child, he's not reading.
Mhm.
Um, then I see some of his friends, they're 5 years old, they're reading books, they're writing words. I'm thinking, okay. So I have to sit in that like really uncomfortable place for a lot longer than I would really prefer to have sat in it. To then see him come out the other side, like, look, mommy, look, I can read the whole book.
Yeah.
Read it out loud to me. And it's like, okay,
Yeah.
well, I came out, I'm seeing the other side of the tunnel, but that discomfort sitting in it, that's what gives you the confidence.
Yeah. 100%. Well, before we wrap up, I want you to share with everybody where they can find you and also about your writing on Substack.
Sure. I'm excited about Substack.
Me too.
I have recently moved my writing over there because I think it's really cool. I'm not super pumped about like the short attention span video stuff going on some of the platforms.
Hmm.
It's like, and I do enjoy it, don't get me wrong.
I know.
But, okay. But, I don't think it's something that I personally want to create at this point in my life. I tried a couple times and it didn't sit right with me. So I have moved over to Substack. At the my name over there is Grow With Them, which I love because that's what
Hmm.
this whole journey is. It's not just like, oh, I'm teaching my kids, or like I am growing right alongside them every day since they were conceived, like for sure. And I have no doubt that that will continue to be the trajectory. So I share over on Substack at Grow With Them and on Instagram at Emma.Hosfeld. It's HOS as in Sam, F as in Frank, ELD as in dog. It's a tricky name.
I know. I kept wanting to throw an L in there. I always want to
Yeah,
say Holsfeld. I don't
I
know
know.
why. Uh,
I know. It's a pickle.
well, so before we completely say goodbye, are there any last minute, or not last minute, but are there any take home messages or words of encouragement or any quotes or anything really, just whatever you feel like you want to leave people with?
I think that what we've kind of already said is like get quiet, take a moment, sit down on your bed, wherever, and like just get really quiet in your mind and look for that next right thing. And chances are it's not going to be something that you want it to be, not like the easy thing, right? It's usually this, it's back there, it's up there, right?
Hmm.
um, do that. Like get up and do that. Be that person. If you get quiet and you think like, what kind of person do I want to be? Like, what would she do? And I think that's actually really powerful. Like it's kind of cliche, but it's like, what would she do is usually something that requires a lot of vulnerability. It requires like probably being kind of awkward at first, mm, and and so it's not what you want it to be, but it is what's going to move you forward.
Hmm.
I think it's like accepting that those challenges are an opportunity to do better.
Right.
Like if you haven't listened to it, go and listen to the Jocko Willink Good on YouTube.
Okay.
And it's like there's a challenge. Good. It's an opportunity to do better. It's an opportunity, like something didn't work out for me. Good. That's fine. This is
Hmm.
an opportunity for me to live out my values. And I think that mindset can change everything. It's really powerful.
Thank you for listening. It is my wish for each of these conversations that you leave feeling inspired and having learned something new, or maybe even challenged to take a look at your own life and your own situation and make adjustments. I think Emma provides some really good thoughts and insights, and I encourage you to share along her journey on Substack and on Instagram. And I also need to make a slight correction. I said my son was born in 2001, and he was not. He was born in 2002. It made me laugh when I was reviewing our conversation, and I heard that, and I thought, oh my gosh. But, that's what happens sometimes when you're in conversation with people. Those dates and little specifics like that can get a bit muddied. It's not that I forgot when my son was born. It's just that what I spit out and what is real did not quite line up. So keep that in mind when you are listening to others speak, that sometimes they might not say it correctly the first time, but I'm here to edit myself and to update that tiny fact. As always, stay curious, stay connected, and stay aware. Until next time.